Ever since I took a hiatus from working on YouTube, I've wanted to come back to writing film video essays. I recently started reworking an old script, but it was too negative and tedious. So instead, I wanted to work on something more positive. And what could be more positive than reviewing every film from one of my favorite directors, Sam Raimi?
Hi, I'm Sam Raimi, the director of The Evil Dead.
It's hard for me not to feel a kinship with Raimi. We're from the same part of the world, studied at the same college, and I'm the age he was when he released his first film. But he's one of my favorite directors, and I've been watching his movies my entire life. Like most people my age, I grew up as a huge Spider-Man fan because of his iconic trilogy. When I was a bit older, I discovered the Evil Dead trilogy, and their gruesome combination of horror and comedy is probably the reason I became a horror movie enthusiast. His infectious style and incredible direction have always fascinated me. So in this video, I'm going to look back at each of his 15 feature-length films, from what I consider to be his worst to his best, talk about what makes each one special, and offer my opinions. Let's get started. Number 15.
Would you still love me if my face were all scraped away, I had no arms, no legs, and I was being kept alive on a heart-lung machine? Would you love me?
No.
For love of the game.
I know that during the intro of this video I said I wanted to stay positive, but this is the only film of Raimi's that I dislike. For Love of the Game is a sports romance film that follows Kevin Costner as a senior pitcher for the Tigers, pitching his final big game and thinking about the one that got away. To stay positive, like I said I wanted to, I'm going to give this film a compliment sandwich. I think that Raimi's style lends itself to the snappy nature of baseball. The scenes of Costner on the mound throwing fastballs are great. I also really appreciated his decision to show Yankees fans as evil demons, trying to get into the mind of our protagonist pitcher, in the same way the Evil Dead franchise's Deadites inflict psychological torture on their victims. Unfortunately, a majority of this movie consists of flatly directed, uninteresting romantic drama between the two leads. There's a common theme in many of Raimi's films of men caught up in their occupations struggling to keep a woman, whether it be pitching, superheroing, or slaying demons, so it's not unfamiliar territory for him to cover. But in this film, I was just completely unmoved by anything that happened. Is it the writing's fault? Is it me just not being a fan of the romance genre? I don't know, but I just found the film to be boring. To the film's credit, I did feel some of the big emotional beats though because of the great soundtrack. The score, combined with some well-placed needle drops, partially resuscitated the beating heart of this film. It's safe to say this movie's not for me. If you love this film, more power to you, but I don't think I'm giving this one a second watch ever. Number 14. After a 9-year hiatus, Raimi returned to the big screen in 2022 with the second installment of the Doctor Strange series, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. For me, this one is kind of a mixed bag. The absolute highlight of this film is the incredibly creative, magical set pieces. So many scenes from this film are burned into my memory. The opening chase with Gargantos, the musical battle, and the zombie Strange climax are some of the best scenes in any Marvel movie, period. When Raimi is let out of his cage, he makes sure every scene is a show-stopping visual spectacle. On the tamer side, I enjoy Strange's dynamics with the other characters. The interdimensional relationship between him and his ex-girlfriend played by Rachel McAdams reminded me of the struggles between Peter Parker and Mary Jane in the best way possible. Benedict Wong, of course, is always great, and Xochitl Gomez's depiction of America Chavez brought some compelling emotional stakes to the story. I think the biggest issues I have with this film all boil down to it being a part of the MCU and needing to fit brand standards. I'm sure you've heard by now, but fellow horror director Scott Derrickson left the project during pre-production, seemingly due to disagreements on the intensity and presence of the horror elements in the script. After leaving the project, Disney slotted in Raimi to direct and ordered a rewrite from Loki showrunner Michael Waldron. You would think that drafting the director of The Evil Dead and a Rick and Morty alumni would result in a compelling story about the multiverse and madness, but you'd be sorely mistaken. The aforementioned horror set pieces are few and far between, and the multiverses our characters visit are distinctly uninteresting. The The alternate dimension our characters spend the most time in is a slightly futuristic NYC, where red means go on stoplights and pizza comes in orbs. Compelling stuff. Most of the film just consists of WandaVision recap and endless scenes of exposition and sequel baiting. It would be easy to attribute the movie's shortcomings to laziness or creative bankruptcy, but I think the main issue is studio demands. How would anyone else have pulled this off better under pressure to keep a PG-13 rating, tie in a TV show, and build enough hype in the character of Doctor Strange to promote an event film on the same tier as No Way Home? I wish that Raimi would have started the Strange trilogy, because then I think there could have been a stronger foundation for him to build off of. He's in talks to return to round out the trilogy, and I'm very interested to continue to see his take on the character. Number 13. The next entry is Raimi's first movie with the mouse, Oz the Great and Powerful. Before every blockbuster in cinemas was a prequel of some sort, Raimi was hired by Disney to direct an origin film for the titular Wizard of Oz. Before I review this though, I have to address the goblin in the room. The lead in this film is James Franco, who sucks and is a terrible person.
I called one of my classes a masterclass sex scenes. I did sleep with students. I didn't sleep with anybody in that particular class, but over the course of my teaching, I did sleep with students.
The reason I'm mentioning all of this is because Franco was a frequent collaborator of Raimi's, and I think it's important to recognize the hard work of everyone else who worked on this film, not just one terrible person. I think this film has held up fairly well despite its glaring flaws. The film's visual effects feel like they haven't aged a day. Many of the environments in the film are beautiful, even if they're in the same style as all those Alice in Wonderland movies from around the same time. I also think that, for being over a decade old, the fully CGI monkey and China doll characters still look impressive, likely due to being designed with style over realism in mind. The decision to emulate the original Wizard of Oz's transition from black and white 4x3 to color widescreen was a genius move, and immediately made this film feel more connected to its source material than any exposition could. Franco's performance in this film ranges from bad to serviceable. He's not helped by an underdeveloped script that doesn't show off his scummy side or his transition to the great and powerful wizard very well either. But the real reason I don't think I'll ever pick this one up again is that it feels like a toned-down version of Army of Darkness, especially with its third act. Now I know the concept of a cinematic siege set piece isn't anything new. Most films owe everything to Seven Samurai anyways, but it's not a stretch to say that Oz is directly ripping off Army of Darkness when the eccentric protagonist brings modern technology into the fantasy world, specifically gunpowder, and has the blacksmith create a vehicle that the protagonist intends to escape back to their own time with, but ends up using it in the final battle. I can call it when I see it. Now there's some subversion to all the elements it mirrors, but why settle for an overall lesser version of a film when you can watch the director's other more interesting work? A little fun fact, this is the only movie he's made that has received a PG rating. Number 12.
The movie of the millennium and the time of your life. Crime Wave. Because, after all, what else is there to do on a Saturday night?
Raimi's sophomore film Crime Wave is weird, and that's putting it lightly. The production of this film is such an interesting story, I can make a dedicated video just about it, but I'll try and give you the short version. After the financial success of The Evil Dead, producers from Hollywood gave Raimi, Campbell, and the Coen brothers a bag of money and told them to do whatever. The lack of initial guidance from Hollywood producers proved disastrous when Raimi underestimated the cost and difficulty of making a studio picture, and the producers stepped in and exercised great control over the rest of the production. The end product was a film that failed critically and commercially, and permanently disillusioned the core crew members with the Hollywood system. This film was almost career-killing for Raimi, and if it wasn't so obscure now, it would be a permanent black eye for everyone involved.
There's a part of me that's very glad that the movie kind of just disappeared. It just vanished for 15 years.
So with all that context, how was the actual film? It's fine. This film was very much a stepping stone for everyone involved, and it feels like they took 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Raimi came into his own visually on this project, and there are a couple of incredibly inventive shots. At the same time though, his inexperience directing actors that aren't Bruce Campbell shows, and the rest of the cast gives spotty performances. In addition to this, the plot is incredibly simple, yet for most of the film I had no idea what was happening. There are some clever set pieces, but most scenes flow into one another, leaving little impact and not progressing the plot. This film is by far the most wacky Raimi movie. It feels like a real-life Looney Tunes episode. Honestly, I hate to say this, but it might even be too much at times.
Of course, the perfect woman's not just gonna walk into my life.
I think if you're a real Raimi completionist, check this one out. If not, watch the clips of Bruce Campbell from this movie on YouTube, and you'll be satisfied. Number 11.
Messing with the devil's gonna get you burned. The Gift.
Coming in just outside of the top 10 is The Gift, released in 2000. The film was arguably the last one he directed before the Spider-Man trilogy made him a household name. The Gift stars Cate Blanchett as a psychic widow trying to solve a crime while being haunted by visions. Blanchett, who I think is the best living actress, is great as usual. Since the film is set in Georgia, she's doing a southern accent and she pulls it off naturally. I wish I could say the same about her co-lead, Keanu Reeves, who feels miscast as a racist redneck and abusive husband. His performance is impossible to take seriously and sort of derails any scene he's in.
Hey, boy, I asked you a question. Give my hat.
I love the setting in this film. The willow trees and architecture give the film a gothic vibe, especially when our characters are visiting the swamps where some of the horror scenes are held. The supernatural element of the film allows for scenes that show off Raimi's skill set. The infrequency of these scenes and their intensity makes them far more impactful. This movie feels like it was heavily influenced by The Sixth Sense, which was released a year prior. I'm not alleging plagiarism, it could just be coincidence or similar thinking, but this film feels quite Shyamalanian. Unlike the master of plot twist movies though, the ending of this film is very predictable, even if it does leave a little intrigue. If you like supernatural mysteries or Cate Blanchett, give this one a watch. The supernatural crime thriller is one of my favorite genres, and despite this film having a few issues, I really enjoyed it. Number 10. Spider-Man 3 is a contentious film. Upon release, and for many years after, people considered it a train wreck, a disappointing end to one of the most iconic film series ever.
See you, chump. What the hell?
In recent years though, due to nostalgia and the passage of time, it's taken on an ironic second life due to some of its more ridiculous scenes. But there's a third wave of reappraisal happening for people who genuinely find the film good. I think I'm somewhere between the second and third groups. There are a lot of factors that work against this film for sure. The most common critique throughout the years is that this movie is overstuffed with side plots and there being 3 main villains. This is 100% true. Spider-Man 3 is Raimi's longest film to date, beating For Love of the Game by just 1 minute. Despite this film only being 12 minutes longer than the previous Spider-Man film he made, the pacing feels far more frantic to try and resolve every subplot and set up every villain. The other major critique I see leveled at this film is that it's too over the top, especially with the emo Peter Parker scenes. Which yeah, it's a Sam Raimi Spider-Man film. I don't see this critique put on any other of the films in this trilogy when they're just as guilty. Besides, for every goofy scene in this film, there's a spectacular dramatic one, like the birth of the Sandman or Eddie Brock going to church to pray for God to kill Spider-Man. I also love how Venom is portrayed in this. Each of the villains from the Spider-Man films has some horror-adjacent element, and I love how the symbiote looks and grabs onto its victims. While this film is not some sort of a secret masterpiece, I think it builds to a strong climax, which kinda makes me forgive some of the worst aspects. There's a certain charm back when nobody had the winning formula, and iconic directors like Raimi, Del Toro, Lee, Shyamalan, and Nolan all threw their distinctive directorial essence behind projects. Don't get me wrong, not everything was perfect back then, and most movies of that era were worse than superhero fare now. But I miss when these movies took big swings, even if they didn't pay off until many years later. Number 9.
In this town, you're either one or the other.
The Quick and the Dead is Raimi's exploration into the Western genre. The film is about a gunfighting tournament where every stock Western character imaginable is dueling for the chance to win a pile of money or to settle a personal vendetta. Our heroine, played by Sharon Stone, seeks to defeat contestant and tournament financier John Harold, played by Gene Hackman. The synopsis I just gave is the whole plot of this film. It's a very simple premise. What makes this film is the Western caricature characters competing in the duels. We have all the classic archetypes, the clergyman, the young gun, the lawman, and of course the cowgirl gunslinger making up the main cast. What makes these characters stand above their shallow writing is the fact they're portrayed by incredible actors. We have a pre-Gladiator Russell Crowe, a young Leonardo DiCaprio, and Keith David portraying the main side characters. I think the most impressive thing about this film is how the plot requires several gunslinger duels to be shown, but Raimi pulls out a unique directorial trick to give each one its own visual identity. This film should feel repetitive, with the characters constantly dueling, but each high noon feels fresh. There's something to be said about what can be produced when under constraints. The inspiration you get from limitations is most obvious in The Quick and the Dead with its limited sets. Almost the entire film takes place in a small western town. You can tell the filmmakers wanted to use every inch of the tiny town of redemption that they built. The only thing I can knock this film for is the plot and character development are light to non-existent.
During filming, Sharon fell for one of her co-stars.
Let's see where you go on this one. Couple of loves on this movie.
My big love. Big, handsome, black man. Magic.
Magic is a horse, by the way, everyone. I want you to know.
But is that necessary for something so influenced by pulp westerns? Is it not enough for a film to have cool gunfights? Number 8. PG-13 horror movies have a bad reputation, often considered not scary or full of cheap jump scares, but Drag Me to Hell avoids the pitfalls of other mild horror movies. The film follows a banker who, after repossessing an old woman's house, becomes cursed. You gotta wonder if someone in Raimi's life got their house repossessed, because it's a recurring plot point in his films. Anyways, this curse manifests in creatively cruel horror set pieces. Probably the most iconic scene being when the old lady vomits bugs onto Allison Lohman. She keeps posting the behind-the-scenes clip from that scene on Twitter.
Oh, that was, well, it was fine until Sam asked me to open my mouth. That was kind of disgusting. Oh my god.
It makes me wonder if Raimi likes making horror movies because he's a sadist. That's the thing that sticks out to me. This film feels equally as mean as any of the Evil Dead movies while sticking to a lower MPAA rating. Like most of Raimi's films, the film is quite funny with its horror. Despite all the horrific things that happen to our characters, there's a distinctly slapstick quality to the scenes. The seance scene made me laugh so hard with how strange it was. There are talking ghosts and dancing demons, and it's just completely off the wall. The only issue with this film is that it relies on some poorly aged CGI effects for some of its set pieces. It's not a massive deal, but something like the stop-motion scenes from the Evil Dead films will always look better in my opinion because they're practically done, even if they're a little silly looking now. Anyways, if you need an actually scary horror film that's PG-13, Drag Me to Hell should be your top contender. Just don't send your traumatized little siblings my way when they're too scared. Number 7.
Do too much. You're not Superman, you know.
Spider-Man is the film that made Raimi a household name. There's a case to be made that this film single-handedly shaped the past 20 years of blockbuster filmmaking by showing how superhero movies could become massive hits. What I think has been lost over the years, though, is how colorful and fun this movie is. Every shot in this film pops with an unmatched color and energy that hasn't been replicated since. The film also sets up some of the most iconic superhero castings ever. While Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst are great as Peter Parker and MJ, J.K. Simmons and Willem Dafoe give the definitive performances as J. Jonah Jameson and the Green Goblin. It's telling that when they were casting a Triple J for the MCU, they just brought back J.K. Simmons, because who else could play him? This film does show its age in some aspects, mostly with the dated CGI and Spider-Man calling Randy Savage gay.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
Actually, he did. He bought this for me on our 10-year anniversary.
But once again, this film set the foundation for not only the Spider-Man trilogy, but the whole of superhero and by extension blockbuster filmmaking for more than 20 years. Watching Spider-Man is like dusting off an old comic book and flipping through the pages. Sure, you'll feel incredibly nostalgic, but you can also recognize the artistry and passion that went into creating this story. Number 6.
From director Sam Raimi. Darkman.
I've always been a fan of horror superheroes. There's Blade, Spawn, Ghost Rider, but most importantly, there's Darkman. Darkman is an original superhero, loosely based on the radio show hero The Shadow. When Raimi couldn't get clearance for using that IP, he created his own hero.
Darkman is presented in such a way as to be as dramatic and smashing as possible, similar to the presentation of comic books.
Though cast in a comic book mold, the young writer-director has invented an entirely new character that reflects a more modern, more dangerous world.
My brother Ivan and myself were comic book readers when we were younger, so I'm sure that had a big influence on the Darkman.
The Darkman character feels like a combination of the Phantom of the Opera and the Invisible Man, for lack of a better comparison. The film stars a pre-fame Liam Neeson as Peyton Westlake, a genius scientist who is attacked in his lab and sustains severe burning across his entire body. The scene of the attack, through when he escapes the hospital, are some of Raimi's finest work, and set the tone for the rest of the film. The prosthetic work in this film is incredible. Neeson spent 5 hours in the makeup chair before shooting, and the effort really shows. With the makeup being so time-intensive, there had to be ways to cheat needing it, which is what makes the plot point of him being able to print his old face so clever to me. This movie also marked a lot of firsts for Raimi. It was his first time working with composer Danny Elfman. I think the soundtrack is one of the main reasons this film feels like a superhero movie. It just has that comic vibe. Darkman was also the first film where Raimi worked with longtime collaborator and editor Bob Murawski. Really interesting story. Apparently Raimi and the studio were fighting each other during the editing process, and Murawski made a rogue cut that neither party agreed on, but both had to accept because the negative had been cut already. Were it not for this film, I doubt any of the Spider-Man movies would have existed. But Darkman is more than just a proof of concept. It's a movie that stands well on its own and is a must-watch in my opinion. Number 5.
They breathe. They suck. Army of Darkness.
Army of Darkness is one of the funniest films I've ever seen. The third Evil Dead movie sends our protagonist Ash 700 years into the past for some medieval madness. This film mostly abandons the horror from the first 2 installments in the series, and instead opts for surreal comedy. The lighter tone allows Raimi's slapstick stooge inspiration to shine through. I don't think I can stress how funny this film is. The entire climax with the skeleton army always makes me smile. The effects in this film are spectacular. This film has a beautiful blend of puppetry, stop motion, compositing, costuming, and makeup, which gives it a campy charm. I just love how everything in this film is presented without any sense of irony or pretension. It's just so entertaining. Bruce Campbell is carrying the comedy, giving a completely unparalleled performance. He always brings an incredible physicality to the slapstick comedy, and it wouldn't work as well without him. The lead performance of this film has become iconic, especially with the endlessly quoted boomstick scene. Raimi tortured Campbell on this production, making his choreography confusing and requesting take after take. You can tell that the frustration from this is seeping into his performance, which helps sell the insanity of this film. It's probably common knowledge now, but this film has 2 endings. The original ending Raimi filmed had Ash oversleeping and waking up in a post-apocalyptic world, keeping in line with the mean-spirited endings from the previous films. However, Universal wanted a happier ending, so Raimi reshot the ending with Ash once again working at his job and slaying one last Deadite. Both serve as perfect endings to one of the best horror trilogies ever. Number 4.
Hank, do you ever feel evil? I do.
A Simple Plan was my favorite first watch for this project, and I'm upset I didn't check this one out sooner. The film is a thriller noir about 3 men who find a downed plane and a huge bag of cash. The film is 2 hours of pure tension, where characters are constantly making the worst decisions possible and digging a deeper hole for themselves. I love a good crime thriller where you're constantly questioning the virtue of the crime being committed as it keeps on getting messier. Probably the strongest part of the film is the performances from Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton as brothers who couldn't be any more different. Paxton is great, but Thornton gives a heartbreaking performance. I'm not familiar with the book this is based on, but I thought the themes in the plot were incredibly interesting. A Simple Plan tackles greed, class, and family in a fascinating, morally gray way. It's also worth mentioning that this film's ending, while sudden, is probably the best of Raimi's signature bad endings. There's a common thread through most of Raimi's films of characters not getting what they wanted and continuing to suffer past the credits, and A Simple Plan has probably the most depressing ending of all. The film is also beautifully shot. Raimi's signature directorial flourishes take a backseat, but you can still feel his impact through the overdramatic shot compositions and blocking. Since the setting of the film is in the Minnesota winter, the film uses the snowy forest to create many beautiful shots with the negative white space snow gives. I think this film is definitive proof Raimi is a brilliant visual storyteller, and not just a one-trick pony who can't operate outside of horror or superhero films. If you love thrillers, definitely give this a watch. If you're like me and a fan of the Safdie brothers or Park Chan-wook's movies, I think you'll love this. Like their films, A Simple Plan is a thriller and then a tragedy. Number 3. Raimi's first feature-length film, The Evil Dead, is a shocking lo-fi horror masterpiece. This is my personal favorite of all of Raimi's films because of how inspiring its creation story is. Basically, after dropping out of college, Raimi and Campbell begged every person in their lives for money to produce the film, and then they took their friends and a few hired actors into the woods of Tennessee to film the project. The filming was hectic, and the actors were prone to injury and illness. Campbell is quoted as saying the production was 12 weeks of mirthless exercise and agony. The end result was a film considered so shocking and horrific it was banned in multiple countries. I just find this film to be an incredible triumph. Raimi and his friends created something out of nothing. Raimi was the same age as me when he made this, and I can't wrap my head around how that was even possible. The Evil Dead still has the same punch that it had back when it was released. I think that part of its horrifying charm is that the film was shot on 16mm film and then enlarged into 35mm, giving it that extra grainy texture. I also think that having amateur actors gives it a more realistic feel. The special effects and camera trickery that create the demon and the Deadites are still incredibly disturbing. The pencil scene is one of the nastiest things I've ever seen put onto film. The direction in The Evil Dead is sublime. It's wild how Raimi had such a distinct visual identity with only a few shorts under his belt. The shot composition and camera movements are excellent and really elevate the quality of the film. The trademark demon point of view cam running through the woods has gone on to become an iconic trope. I also love Bruce Campbell's performance in The Evil Dead. It's a unique performance from him because for most of the film he's incredibly reserved, playing a shy, cowardly character. If you watch all 3 Evil Dead movies, there's a great arc of Ash becoming increasingly insane throughout each film, and this provides a great baseline. Now there are certainly flaws with this film. There's one scene that Raimi says he regrets for crossing the line with its brutality. Also, there's not much character development for the future Deadites or plot, but this film is an aesthetic and artistic triumph, and I can't justify not placing it this high. It's the film that started it all, and if you revisit it, you can tell that the crew are going on to do great things. Number 2.
Let's see who's behind the mask.
Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest superhero films of all time. If it weren't for the original Spider-Verse movie, I would argue that it's hands down the best big screen adaptation of the character. What makes this film so special is how well the character of Spider-Man falls into Raimi's tortured man archetype. The opening sequence of this film perfectly shows all the stressors in Peter Parker's life. From losing his pizza gig, to being behind in class, to his job at the Bugle sucking, an on-again off-again relationship with MJ, Harry indirectly blaming him for the death of his father, Aunt May getting foreclosed on, and being behind for rent, it's safe to say he's going through some tough times. But this extra humanistic depiction of Spider-Man is what makes him such an endearing hero, and this film so captivating. Spider-Man is truly the everyman hero, and this film understands that far better than any other Spider-Man media. Besides the personal strife affecting Peter, the film's more traditional villain is also excellent. Alfred Molina's depiction of Dr. Octopus is tragic and horrific. I have to mention the horror-inspired hospital scene. Raimi pulls a couple tricks out of his Evil Dead horror bag to really establish Otto as a legitimate threat. This scene, coupled with still stunning CGI effects, really sells the character. The film as a whole looks incredible. It's shot on 35mm film, and you can tell every penny from the success of the first film went into making this one a visual and technical marvel. I think that no film since this has been able to capture the expressionistic visual style and quirks of Sam Raimi quite like this one. Spider-Man 2 is a film I've watched countless times throughout my life. I didn't have Letterboxd as a kid, but there's a strong case to be made that this is the single film I have seen the most times in my life. With probably over 24 viewings at this point, there's just such a timeless quality to it. I still think it blows most of the superhero films released after it out of the water. The film got re-released into theaters this year, and I'm so sad I missed it. And after I'm done making this video, I'm going back to watch it again. Number 1.
Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn.
What is there even to say about Evil Dead 2? It's the definitive horror comedy, one of the biggest cult movies of all time, and the best Sam Raimi film. To me, this film feels like Sam Raimi's thesis on creativity. This movie just oozes with unique filmmaking techniques, over-the-top effects, and beautiful cinematography. It's spontaneous and designed to be pure entertainment. Evil Dead 2 is equal parts reboot and sequel, ratcheting up the intensity and comedy of the first Evil Dead. There's still quite a bit of disturbing gore, but this film leads into the camp side of the first one. This film also introduces the iconic chainsaw hand, an invention equal parts genius and stupid that it has made Ash Williams an iconic horror character. It doesn't even need to be said that Bruce Campbell elevates the entire film. For a large portion of the runtime, he's acting in a one-man play of suffering against the demons. There's a certain fourth wall breaking element to the entire film, like the demon is just Raimi and the crew having fun torturing Bruce and dousing him in fake blood. The legacy of this film is hard to understate. It's not a stretch to say that none of the other movies I ranked besides his first two would exist without this film. This movie was Raimi's last chance to save a tanking career, and he made a lean, mean movie, learning from the mistakes of the first two productions he made. Evil Dead 2 reinvented the horror comedy genre, and I think it's Raimi's most deserving film to be recognized in the canon of great cinema. All this to say, it's a masterpiece. It's equally as provocative and preposterous as it was on release. I actually think this film was ahead of its time with how popular surrealist comedy is now. I hope that people for generations to come discover this video rental store classic, and that it continues to inspire people to make horror movies just like it did for me. Thank you everyone for watching. I guarantee he isn't watching, but thank you Sam for making such inspiring films. Without your work, I wouldn't be as passionate about films and filmmaking. Hopefully my love for his filmography rubs off on you, and you go watch one of his films. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. See you in the next one.